Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. So the day that you are watching this, it should be the 11th of November or Remembrance Day. And whilst I do have complicated feelings about this day for remembering veterans but not civilians who lost their lives, for example, and various complicated feelings about the army in general, I do know that World War I and World War II historical fiction is a very popular time period to read about, a very popular time period to write about. Now, I have also talked on this channel about how I don't often read World War II fiction because of the romanticisation of war, which is also one of my complicated feelings about Remembrance Day, and also because I feel like a lot of people who aren't related to the trauma of the Holocaust profit off the Holocaust through publishing. Just look up the scandal relating to the tattooist of Auschwitz if you'd like to know what I'm talking about. But as I know this time period of history is very popular when it comes to literature, I thought I could recommend you some of my favourite books about the First and Second World Wars. I've got several books here to get through, so let's begin. The first book on my list is probably one of the most famous World War I historical fictions about the First World War, and that is Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks. And I think this one is very famous for a reason. So in this book we follow two main characters across different time periods. We have Stephen Rayford, who is living in France before the start of the First World War, and his granddaughter Elizabeth Benson, who is living in the 1970s and trying to uncover the history of her grandfather. At the beginning of the novel, Rayford is living in a French farmhouse and he has an affair with the farmer's wife. Then we flash forward to his time in the First World War when he was a miner in the trenches. So he was tunnelling alongside other people trying to reach the German trenches underground whilst the warfare was going on above them. This was a very dangerous job, with bombs exploding underground, tunnels collapsing, being trapped in very small dark spaces. And I think Sebastian Faulks does an excellent job of the atmosphere of danger of this book. I think if you are not into the romanticisation of the First and Second World War, like I am not, this book really goes there with the real gritty, disgusting reality of what it was like, and the futility of war, I think, is one of the major themes of the book. It has a lot of very complicated characters. Stephen Rayford is not a particularly likeable man, but the description is just so compelling that you feel drawn on through it. And with the 1970s part, Sebastian Faulks is commenting on our understanding of World War I, on the common narrative of what the trenches were like and our heroes. And so we see how the psyche of Sebastian Rayford is affected by the trauma that he goes through. Though the novel is told from the perspective of an omniscient narrator who sometimes gives us a broad overview, we are very close in with all of the characters, allowed to explore their minds and see what effect that this war is having on ordinary people. Another book that I think addresses this idea of the futility of war, but told from the opposite perspective, is All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Remarque. And this is a classic of World War I fiction, one I know a lot of people have heard of, that tells the story of four young boys from a German town who are conscripted at the same time and go into the war. This book is very, very detailed and quite mundane. It does deal with the mind-numbing monotony of war, punctuated by these intense periods of trauma. It also deals with the way that the soldiers felt so detached from civilian life, as if their experiences had made them unfit for returning to civilian life at the end of the war, and the way that a lot of these soldiers didn't make it back. And in the same way as Birdsong, the futility of war, the massive loss of life compared to gaining like 2 foot of territory is explored. The way that the higher-ups treat their infantry as well is a really important part of the book. And also the blind nationalism, the way that these boys were brainwashed almost into joining the army. Another very famous historical fiction about World War I that I absolutely loved is Regeneration by Pat Barker. This is a trilogy, but I haven't actually finished all of them. I've read Regeneration and The Eye in the Door, but I haven't yet read The Ghost Road. And this one is fairly different from those other two that I've described. Birdsong and All Quiet on the Western Front are very focused on being in the trenches, whereas Regeneration is set at Craiglockhart, which was a mental institution. And it is from the perspective of one of the psychiatrists, as well as some of the men who have been put into this institution to deal with their shell shock, or as we now know it, PTSD. We follow Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, and other men who are being treated in this hospital for both their physical wounds and the toll that it has taken on their mental health. This novel in particular, the first one in the series, is a really deep exploration of shell shock, of the treatment of it in the early 20th century in hospitals and the way that people who had dealt with it were viewed, and particularly the work of Dr. W.H.R. Rivers, who was a psychologist and anthropologist. And Barker explores ideas of nationalism, identity and masculinity, and how these play into both war and the mental health of the characters. It is a really pared back, sparse book. The writing style in many ways mirrors the poetry of Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon, with sweeping beauty cut with these really detailed descriptions of the hardships that these men are going through. It is quite a visceral book, quite a difficult book to read, but I think one that is absolutely beautiful and very good for understanding the experience of these men whose lives and mental health were completely changed by the war. Going in a different direction now, and one that is also particularly famous, is the children's book War Horse by Michael Morpurgo. Millions of animals lost their lives during the First World War, horses and dogs in particular, and of course they did not choose to go to war or know what war was about. And Michael Morpurgo in War Horse follows the life of one boy and his horse, who he buys at a village fair before the First World War, and makes him plough a field even though he's a racehorse. They have a good relationship with one another, and then they both get conscripted into the war. The horse as an officer's horse and the boy as an infantryman. And we see their experiences in war and the way they come back together. A really beautiful, heartrending book, which I think does a really good job of this for a middle grade audience, but it is still incredibly poignant and well done for adult readers as well. I think it's one that you can appreciate regardless of your age, and I think looks at a slightly different take on the war. And then finally, I wanted to mention a book that I haven't read yet, just because it is the one that is on my TBR, and that is At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop. And this one is about Senegalese soldiers fighting for France during the First World War. It follows two men who end up being conscripted together to fight in the war, but when Alpha Ndeye loses his close friend Mademba Diop while fighting, he loses himself and his sense of what he is fighting for. The reason that I really want to read this book in particular is because I think that a lot of the World War fiction that I've read, and I'm talking about here, comes from a very Western perspective and doesn't really look into the impact of the empire and the reason for the First World War, Germany expanding its empire and the other imperial powers wanting to stop it, and the effect that that had on the people who were colonised, rather than just from the perspective of the coloniser. Then we will move on to World War II fiction. I've read a lot more World War II fiction than World War I, although a lot of it has been not very good. But hopefully, if that's something you are looking for, you will find it in these recommendations. The first one on my list is another one that is incredibly famous because it was made into a film, and that is Atonement by Ian McEwan. Now, I have read a few Ian McEwan books, and Atonement is the only one that I actually like, but I think it's brilliant. I think it is so wonderfully done. It is set in a house, an English country house in the 1930s, before the beginning of World War II, where a family are having some people to stay and they are putting on a play. The daughter of the house and the son of one of the servants of the house, who was put through education by the daughter's father, have sort of tension between them that builds over the course of this very hot, very close, very fractious summer day, until the point where her younger sister, who is incredibly precocious and controlling, sees something she doesn't understand, and then it comes to light that there has been a terrible crime committed, and so she falsely accuses someone who she knows hasn't committed the crime, but because she was confused by the things that she saw and because of her own petulance, she ends up accusing the son, and he goes to prison. We then flash forward to during the Second World War and his experience in France and on Dunkirk, being evacuated from France. The experience that this lie and this great trauma had on this family. So this is a much more closely focused book, and it doesn't all deal with the Second World War. It also deals with this family, because the younger sister, Bryony, becomes a nurse, and so we see her dealing with the invalids, people who have been shipped back to England with their injuries, and we see that perspective on the Second World War, as well as this perspective of a young man who is a private in the British Army. This book is incredibly sad and moving. I think the characters are really well developed, and I think that it is so wonderfully written. Really has the feeling of those 1920s and 30s English country house novels in the beginning. And like I said, the atmosphere of this sticky, close, claustrophobic summer's day is so wonderfully evoked through the first part of the novel. And the ramifications of how everything spins out and the tragedy of the novel makes it one that really bears rereading. I love the style and the way that the novel is formed. I think it is wonderfully done. I think that Atonement was shortlisted or perhaps won the Booker Prize, and another Booker Prize winning novel about the Second World War, which had been for a long time my favourite novel until I think the Wolf Hall trilogy challenged it for the top spot. That is The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. This book is again set in a kind of adjacent to the Second World War rather than directly involved in it in a way that you would often think about a classic World War II novel. This is set in a villa in the hills of Tuscany. The Germans have retreated and the Allies are on their way. We are in this villa where there is a nurse who has been left with a patient who has completely been covered in third-degree burns over all of his body. She is looking after him. Someone she knew from Canada, a thief friend of her father's, has also turned up at this villa, and in the garden there is camping a sapper who is trying to defuse a bomb, and he is a Sikh man. We see the interactions between all of these people and their experience of this very isolated, closed off, sort of towards the end of the Second World War, their interactions with one another and their experience of race and colonialism. We also have the stories of the English patient himself. They call this man who has been burnt the English patient because he speaks English with a British accent. And so they assume that he is English and call him the English patient. And we hear him tell stories of before the Second World War and during the Second World War in North Africa. His experience with the art world and with the embassies, with government, his experience of colonialism in North Africa, and being a part of the colonial elite, and also his an affair that he has with a married woman and their experience of their love. This novel is one of the most beautifully written books that I've ever read. It is stunningly lyrical and lucid. The way that it slips between different perspectives and into the stories that he's telling. It is one of those books with no speech marks, I'm pretty sure, or at least there's no clear delineation between when we are in the present and when we are in the English patient's past. But it makes you feel that kind of hazy, dreamlike quality of this very unwell man who the only thing he can do is think and tell stories. He cannot hold a book to read or anything. We slowly uncover the mystery of what happened to him whilst also seeing the experience of these people during the Second World War, and I think it is just so slow and still and lovely. One classic that is set during and after the Second World War that I read this year and really enjoyed is Katalin Street by Magda Szabo. This one is set in Hungary and is about three families who live on the same street, Katalin Street. They all live next door to one another and the children are friends with one another. It begins with one of the families newly moving in and they're getting to know the other families. We also flash forward to Budapest under Soviet occupation, where none of the families live on that street anymore and where all the families seem to be touched by a tragedy that happened, that we're not sure quite what it is. What we do know, however, is that one of the families of these three is a Jewish family and the Nazis are coming to Hungary. So we also know that the little girl from this Jewish family is dead and she is haunting the other families in the Soviet future as a ghost, seeing how they are living and watching them. The novel explores both the Second World War and also the Soviet Union, and as it was in Hungary, and the idea of being watched and being something coming for you. There is a sinisterness, but everything is very slow and very bureaucratic at the same time. We know that there is something hanging over us, something bad is going to happen in both timelines, but you can't quite pinpoint what it is. It's just a sense of unease in the style of writing and in the characters themselves. We see different memories from different perspectives. We flow in and out the different perspectives of the different children in the family and how they experienced what was going on, knowing that their parents were holding things from them, for example, and on into the future where they who were once so connected, the ways that they no longer communicate. It's again really so moving, but a really readable novel, one that I found very compelling and drove me on to read it. I couldn't really talk about World War II fiction without talking about a Holocaust novel. There are lots of Holocaust novels, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I feel like a lot of the time non-Jewish people are profiting off the Holocaust in a way that feels really unsavoury. It is such a huge period of trauma that it is one that obviously has been written about a lot, and the one novel that I read that I thought was incredibly beautiful. Now, I'm not Jewish myself, so I can't say how accurate the Jewish representation is, but Jonathan Safran Foer, who wrote it, is, and that is Everything is Illuminated, a book which retells the story of his grandparents in part. This book has two timelines, although one is moving much faster than the other. We have a character called Jonathan Safran Foer who is going to Ukraine to find out about his family's past, about this one picture that he has with one name written on the back of it, who he doesn't know who that is. And so he is travelling to Ukraine to try and find out about the picture. He meets a tour guide who speaks very unusual English, and lots of kind of funny, surreal, satirical things happen to him, but there is also a lot of tragedy involved in that too. The other time period is about this shtetl in Ukraine, and we go all the way back to the medieval period and travel forward in time through the time period of the shtetl until we get to the Second World War. Now, as this book deals with the Holocaust, it is of course really traumatic, and it is not just that part of it, but the pogroms and also the modern day Ukraine. There is still a lot of poverty and a lot of difficulty experienced by our tour guide. It is a novel with humour and with a lot of heart, and it is again incredibly beautifully written and really compulsive reading. I thought it was so stunningly done. Then we have two books I read last year. The first of these is How We Disappeared by Jing Lee. And as I've mentioned before on my channel, what I do enjoy about World War II fiction when I read it now is when it is told from a perspective that I am not familiar with, when it is not set in the UK or France or Germany. How We Disappeared is set in Singapore, and we again have two time periods, one in the modern day and one in the past. So we have this woman who lived in a village in Singapore who, when the Japanese invaded, was taken to be a comfort woman, as they were called, and we see her experience of that. We also have the future in modern Singapore, a young boy who has recently lost his grandmother, who tells him the big family secret before she dies, and he sets off to try and find out what happened and the truth surrounding this. We also see the young woman who was taken to be a comfort woman as an older woman in modern Singapore, living as a poor woman who has recently lost her husband and who doesn't talk to anybody. Is written in kind of a slightly detached style, which normally I don't really like, but I think it worked in this novel because of the brutality of the trauma. I don't think it would have been possible to write or to read a book like this without a little bit of detachment. Although it does of course deal with a lot of sexual violence, it is done in a way that has humanity and heart, and the centre of that is not the violence, but instead the relationships that these three women form with one another, the way that they support each other through this terrible, tragic time, and the way that they find the resilience to survive. It is also an interesting look at Singapore, at modern Singapore, and the way that it treats people, the experience of families in modern Singapore, and also of capitalism is very interestingly done, and also the way that history is told, because the Japanese don't admit to these comfort women, for example. It is a very readable novel, again, one that I think that if some of these books might be more lyrical and harder to access, I think How We Disappeared is a very accessible novel, and one that I would definitely recommend. And then the final book that I would like to recommend is set in the 1930s in Ethiopia, and that is The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize last year. And this is a stunningly beautiful novel that tells the story of the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in the 1930s and the guerrilla war that happened there. It is prefaced with a line from the Iliad, and this book is really told in a way to make the women warriors of Ethiopia into the great heroes of a kind of epic poem, but it isn't told in verse or anything. It's just got the vibe of that epic poem. It tells the story of this one woman who has been sold as a slave to this family, and so we see the Ethiopian culture and what it was like before the invasion, the power dynamics between men and women and between different classes, and the involvement of slavery. Then the invasion happens and the man goes off to war, but the women end up following. There is a lot of sexual violence as well as other violence in this too. It's also told from the perspective of a Jewish man in Mussolini's army, who is a photographer, and he is made to photograph the things that this horrible general does in Ethiopia when he captures people as prisoners of war. He has it held over him, his Jewishness. His parents have already been taken in Italy. The ways that he acts as a standby, the way that he holds things are explored, the way that violence is committed within societies and between societies, and the way that people are coerced or convinced into doing things is explored. It is also so beautifully written. There are all of these vignettes. There is a Greek style chorus. There is a real focus on light, and the imagery of sunlight is really well deployed. I think it is such a beautiful, complex, in-depth novel. There is so much to get out of it, and I really think it would be one that I could read again and still get even more from. So those are all of the World War I and World War II novels I have to recommend today. I hope you find a recommendation there that you might be interested in. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!